Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I took this photograph at 7 a.m. in the morning with the sun rising just over the sort of car park from my office, and everyone got quite excited about it. I really liked it. I don't know if you remember, there's a very famous Schaeffer play called The Royal Hunt of the Sun. This photograph reminded me of that. It's a fantastic play. It's about Pizarro, the Spanish conqueror, who goes to conquer the Inca kingdom in Latin America. And it's quite sad, in point of fact. I'd like to thank Folly Batibo of Al Jazeera for yesterday's inside story. I'll put up a photograph that she tweeted of herself with Femi Kuti at the New Africa Shrine in Lagos, which I liked. And this inside story was whether BRICS can counter the West. Leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa launched a $100 billion development bank, fund infrastructure projects, as well as in the founding countries, as well as in developing nations, headquartered in Shanghai. India, expected to produce the first president, will start out with $50 billion in capital. Total capital is expected eventually to double to $100 billion. So-called contingent reserve arrangement will also be created of another $100 billion, where China is contributing $41 billion, South Africa is contributing $5 billion. And so this was very much about that. It was myself, a chap called Raji Biswas from the IHS Global Insight, and Simon Fremantle from Standard Bank. And I have to admit I was a little bit contrary, because it is a good thing. More competition is always a good thing. But I had some, issues which I was raising in that particular debate. But it was most enjoyable, and I thank Folly for that. The next Mindspeak will be on Saturday, July the 26th, at the Intercontinental. I look forward to hosting Joshua Oigara of Kenya Commercial Bank. I did an interview on the 28th of November last with him, which is an interesting video to watch to see what has happened subsequently. We filmed a brief description that I gave before Madame Lagarde's Mindspeak of what Mindspeak is. If you're interested, that link is up there on the website as well. And then all the previous links started with this year: Lagarde, Naikuni, Charles Ireland, the EAC Secretary General Richard Sesibera, the National Bank CEO Munir Ahmed. My home thoughts, my little one, is finding it a little cold and finds her way into our bed during the night. And she says to me in the morning, "I really don't know how it happens. I must be sleepwalking." And I said, "Darling, I absolutely understand, and in fact I'm quite glad." President Assad was sworn in for a new 7-year term on state television on Wednesday, in quite a grand ceremony, particularly the entrance where he walked through. And my view is, I think that the entire and largely manufactured rebellion has bled Syria to death, in point of fact. So in some respects, yesterday was a Pyrrhic victory for Assad. However, a lot of people were calling for his demise since 2011, and he has confounded those once overwhelming expectations. And in many respects, his argument is now proving correct, as the West fears the boomerang effect of all these jihadists that have made their way to places like Syria and Iraq. Global Research has posted his entire inauguration speech. And I'll just quote a few items. "A few years ago, some called for freedom. Your response was to remain free in the age of subservience, to be masters in the age of slaves. They patronized you with their calls for democracy. Today you are more capable of teaching the subservient people in our Arab region concepts they do not know, like sovereignty, perseverance, defiance, and dignity. You are more capable of teaching them lessons in democracy." And he said the war waged against the Syrian people is a dirty war. AFP tweeted this photograph of Palestinians sleeping at the yard of a UN school in the northern Gaza Strip town of Beit Lahia early on July 16th, 2014. It's pretty arresting. Russian President Vladimir Putin walks past an honor guard after his joint press conference with the Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff at Planalto Palace in Brasilia on July the 14th. The Israeli army said it had stopped an attempt by more than a dozen Palestinian fighters to infiltrate southern Israel through tunnels in Gaza. Vinod Khosla, this is an article in Bloomberg, spars with surfers over Pacific Beach. How do you force Mr. Khosla to comply with the law? Joseph Cotchett, a lawyer for Surf Rider, asked the judge. Somehow, somewhere, justice has to rain down on this individual, Mr. Khosla, and go to the Coastal Commission and unlock that gate, he said. Cotchett then invoked US President Ronald Reagan's plea to Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall. And that's probably the president's helicopter. It flies over pretty regularly. I think he prefers that way to get around. But early in the morning, it didn't sound very good at all. Ronald Reagan's plea to Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall. Take off that lock, Mr. Khosla. If not, you're going to pay a fine. I'll put up a photograph of Martin's Beach as seen from a bluff in Half Moon Bay, California, where he owns this land. And of course, he made his billions with Sun Microsystems, and famously said, the future, I think it's this helicopter, doesn't sound too good at all. The future is not seen in the rear view mirror. It's one of my favorite quotes. Was Vinod Khosla who bagged $1 billion at Sun Microsystems? I started my piece in the FT. In Silicon Valley, who said the future is not seen in the rearview mirror, and I was referring to Africa. Currency markets, Euro 135.24. This is, I think, a 1 month low. Dollar index 80.51, touched a 1 month high of 80.577 overnight. Japanese yen 101.49, Swissy 0.8983, the pound 171.40. You will recall it touched 171.90 not too long ago, which was a more than 6-year high. Aussie 0.9367, bounced back from a 2-week low of 0.9329. India rupee 60.17, South Korean won 1031.65, Rial 222.37, Egyptian pound 7.1518, and the South African rand a little bit firm at 1068.37. Euro dollars softening up. I'll put up a 3-month chart, last at 135.24. The common currency touched a 1 month low at 135.20, and lots of people looking for a break of 135. Euro hit a 5-month low against the yen, and against the sterling it's touching levels not seen since September 2012. We believe circumstances are fast increasing the risks that the ECB will be forced to launch further unconventional measures, says Barclays. What, when and how are less certain, but there are strong hints that a weaker euro may be the only channel to reflate the economy. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. That's begun to firm up a little bit, and you note that Yellen was not entirely dovish. She signaled that if unemployment starts to fall dramatically, then I think she's going to move more quickly. And what that speaks to is the situation where the markets move ahead of the policymakers in the event of very strong data. Murdoch's Time Warner, Murdoch is apparently has offered $75 billion to acquire Time Warner, which would give his 21st Century Fox Inc. control over a vast swathe of what consumers see on TV. More than 20% of the $85 a month average US cable bill, about double the current amount according to Bloomberg Industries estimates. And certainly, as he's gotten older and had some other issues to deal with, he's not asleep at the wheel, is he? And moving on to commodity markets, gold has popped its head back over 1,300 at 1,304.775. Yeah, I'm not very bullish about that at all. Touched 1292.26 on July the 15th, which was the lowest level since June the 19th. Crude oil back above 100 at 100.81. and frankly below 100 it's a trading buy stroke steal. Fell far deeper than I expected. I thought it was going to base out around 104 given the geopolitical noise levels, but obviously it didn't. But I think it's based out now. I'm going to put up the chart of the day from Bloomberg, which shows India's international reserve assets, including gold, jumping $41 billion to $316 billion as of July 4th, and is now within 2% of its record high in September 2011. Coming to Africa, the Ivory Coast is to sell post-default Eurobonds for less than Kenya. A benchmark-sized dollar-denominated bond today. Borrowing costs of the West African nation that defaulted on debt in 2011 dropped to record lows. Countries marketing the securities due in 2024 at about 5.875%. Kenya was sold at 6.875% last month. Of course, Ivory Coast's economy is a $31 billion economy, recovering from a crisis after that disputed election in 2010. Predicted expansion of 8.2% this year. Yields on Ivory Coast's existing debt fell for a seventh day, dropping 2 basis points to 590, a record low on a closing basis. You will recall that I suggested people buy that at the time of that coup and counter coup, and then when Bagbo was kicked out eventually. Interesting piece on BD Live. Forget the BRICS aspirations, try exporting instead. A World Bank study published earlier this year finds that South Africa's share of the global export market stagnated over the last decade to 2012, while the BRICS share more than doubled. SA had real export growth of just 0.6% a year from 2005 to 2011 against 6.4% for middle-income countries, including the BRICS. Mineral export volumes have been virtually flat since 2001. Non-mineral export volumes have been virtually flat, and that includes services. Other BRICS countries have grown their services exports since 2005. SA has not, even though services account for about 2/3 of SA's economy. Sub-Saharan Africa, a real export success story. Its share of South Africa's exports has jumped from 19% to 29% since the early 2000s, over which time the European Union share has fallen from 41% to 28%. Exports to BRICS countries, mainly of minerals, have also jumped over the period from 5% to 19%. Africa now accounts for about half of South Africa's non-mineral exports, which is good. I'll put up a photograph of Mighty Nkona Mashabane, President Zuma, and Lahanla Nene exchanging a few words at this BRICS summit in Brazil. The South African all-share is up 12.582% this year now, very close to another record high. The all-share index is back above 52,000, jumped 0.66% yesterday. Dollar rand, little bit firmer, just below 1070 at 1068.37, but we've been working around these levels for a while. Egyptian pound, it's been there for eternity, 7.15. Egyptian stock market shaved 0.12% lower yesterday, but remains up 26.703% this year. The Nigerian all-share is up 4.11575% and at fresh 2008 highs. The Nigerian leader, Goodluck Jonathan, wants $1 billion loan to help fight Boko Haram. On Wednesday sought approval from Parliament to borrow up to $1 billion abroad to help the armed forces tackle the security threat posed by the Islamist insurgent group Boko Haram. Did you watch that video? Isn't it incredible? When Abu Bakr Shakar was sort of saying, bring back our army, and taking the mickey out of bring back our girls. It's sort of, he's a bizarre character from these little vignettes. Jonathan, facing intense criticism at home and overseas for his government's failure to curb a spreading campaign of violence by the Islamist militants, made the request in a letter read to Nigeria's Senate and House of Representatives. His government is accused by critics of not doing enough to protect civilians in Africa's biggest economy and oil producer from Boko Haram, who of course confirmed that they reached into Lagos not too long ago. killed thousands and abducted hundreds since launching an uprising in the northeast in 2009. You are no doubt cognizant of the ongoing and serious security challenges which the nation is facing as typified by the Boko Haram terrorist threat, Jonathan said in the request. For this reason, I seek the concurrence of the National Assembly for external borrowing of not more than $1 billion, upgrade equipment, training and logistics of the security forces. Jonathan's letter said the upgrade for the security services could include a government-to-government arrangement, but did not name any specific foreign country. His request was expected to raise some questions, as Nigeria's 2014 budget already provides for nearly $6 billion in security spending. Peugeot has announced they've signed a deal to build cars in Nigeria. The Ghana Stock Exchange eased 0.82% yesterday. It's now up only 8.997%. Then I learned Ghana will not draw second half of $3 billion China loan. Ghana will not draw the remaining $1.5 billion tranche of a $3 billion loan agreed with China in 2011 due to disagreements over the terms of the deal, Ghana's finance minister said on Wednesday. The proposal is to then cancel the tranche A, which has not been dispersed because of the difficulties and challenges that we have had in coming to an understanding with the China Development Bank, Turnbull said. So that's not good news either. There's no question that Ghana and Zambia misbehaved badly during the boom years, Nicholas Spiro. They were among the naughtiest pupils in the class, and they're now suffering the consequences. Ghana's net debt levels are set to reach 61% of GDP by December. Budget deficit exceeds 10% for a third consecutive year. Debt ratio was 26% in 2006. Ghana's currency has slumped 29% against the dollar. Inflation's at 15%. Liquidity crunch is so severe that the central bank printed money to finance the government's budget gap in the first quarter. Nobody would have expected such a rapid increase in debt, Bernard Anaba said. The debt relief gave us breathing space, but the campaign has been forgotten too soon. Jubilee 2000 ran a program called Drop the Debt, supported by musicians such as Bono and Bob Geldof to help persuade wealthier nations to cancel the outstanding loans of the world's poorest nations so that funds could be spent on health and schooling. Ghana's government has scrapped fuel subsidies, imposed a moratorium on new contracts in an effort to curb spending. Authorities have been reluctant to seek emergency aid from the IMF. They may be forced to do so. Indeed, that's what I was saying. I'll come to what I was saying. Ghana postponed the sale of its third Eurobond at least twice this year, requires a backstop of funding, while the government puts in place policies to curb the fiscal and current account deficits, he said. Zambia's crisis is less severe and more recent. Fiscal gap widened to 6.8% of GDP in 2013 from an average of just 2.3% between 2005 and 2012. Very interesting article, well worth looking in full. And I wrote about this in early June when I said, look at Ghana, where the president claims he's looking for a homegrown solution to a situation of his own making, and frankly, there isn't one. And I was saying then that I expected the IMF to be called in. I appreciate the nature and the tone. I was talking about Maputo, of the IMF's engagement in Africa, which has been recalibrated for the 21st century. And it is clear to me, and I said this is in June, that the IMF has a role to play, not least because policymakers will make mistakes. I said, look at Ghana, where the president claims he's looking for a homegrown solution to a situation of his making, and frankly, there isn't one. I follow markets ahead of words, and the Ghana cedi, which has collapsed more than 20% this year, is the loudest signifier of all, now 29%. I'll put up a photograph of Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama. And then I flipped onto his Twitter handle, and as of today, he said, as a people we have had to make sacrifices. I wish to assure you that the results of these sacrifices would begin to show very soon. Whilst these measures have been a bitter pill, doing nothing would have caused an economic meltdown. It would have made a lot more people to suffer. I've had to prove strong but bitter measures to improve revenue and reduce expenditure in the face of our temporary economic challenges. Our medium-term prospects are very bright. We are working to overcome our energy shortfalls. Ghana will prevail again, he said. So at least there's now some semblance of trying to deal with the situation. The security forces are combing the forest to make sure the attackers have no safe haven. Kenyan security forces are searching the forest near the border with Somalia for attackers who killed at least 87 people near the country's coast over the past month. Kenya's military destroyed at least 4 camps being used by the assailants in Boni Forest. This is the Daily Nation citing people it didn't identify. The security forces suspect the attackers are a band of radicalized youth trained by the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militia who have returned to Kenya from fighting in Somalia after losing ground to African Union peacekeepers, it said. The security forces are combing the forest to make sure the attackers have no safe haven. Operations are still underway, and actually yesterday when I went for my interview with Folly at the Al Jazeera studio, Catherine Soy was there, and I said to her, "It's funny you're here because I've just been watching you reporting from Lamu." And then she interestingly said they'd been softening up that forest since she'd been down there. Kenya Commercial Bank rallied 2.88% yesterday to close at a record of 53.50. It's an all-time closing high, and it's up 13.2275% this year, so pretty good timing to get Joshua onto back onto MindSpeak. Housing Finance reported its first half profit after tax accelerated 19.4703%, and profit before tax up 18.0545%. They're paying a 75 cents a share interim dividend, so that will get people interested. And I saw that today, it sort of popped high, and I think that must have been a reason for it. But interestingly, earnings were flat. Where the big jump came was from non-interest income, which spiked pretty dramatically, about threefold. East African Cables reported first half earnings per share increased 12.345%. Turnover was up marginally, but they were pretty confident in what they were saying. Higher volumes, factory upgrade will result in additional capacity and enable them to produce new products. I like this photograph of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner in an aerial flying display at Farnborough International. Kenya shilling is at 87.799. Key issue for the shilling is 88.50. Nairobi all shares up 10.128% this year. It's corrected 2.0762% since hitting a record high on July the 2nd. A little bit circumspect and places got a little bit ragged, but I expect a broad-based move higher because of the lower interest rate structure. NSE 20 down 1.1368%. And if you need to check any listed share, if you scroll right down on Rich Wrap-Ups, you'll find a link and you can check everything from there. Once again, thank you.